Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with you tonight. It's going to be a great conversation. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to get going. We're going to get this show on the road. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you all here with us tonight. Should be a good conversation. The way we do things here, for those of you who may not be familiar, is that I give my opening remarks and make my opening comments. And while I'm giving those opening remarks and opening comments, while I'm doing that, at that point, people are sending in their super chats, and I'm writing them down. I don't respond to them in the moment. And as those super chats are coming in, I'm writing them down. And then when my opening remarks are finished, at that point, I do a roll call. When we find out who is on the other side of the camera, we find out who's here. We call people out, names and locations, and we find out about the amazing community that we are part of here on these streams. And then after that, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how we do things. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, I recommend that you send me a super chat and I will write it down. And it'll be on the list. And then in the second half of the show, I will do my best to give you an answer. It may not be the answer that you're looking for. It may not be the answer that you want, but I will do my best to give you an answer. Occasionally, I'll get a super chat that's obscene or something like that. I'm not going to answer that. If it's about somebody I know, I'm not going to share their personal business. But for the most part, I'll give you an answer. I'll try to give you an answer if you send me a super chat. So thank you, everybody. If you could please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. I will let you know we are live on 3 different apps right now. We are live on Facebook. We are live on YouTube. And we are also live on Rockfin. So that's where we are streaming right now. I don't know how much longer YouTube is going to tolerate me. I don't know how much longer Facebook is going to tolerate me. But the folks at Rockfin are largely committed to free speech online. So if you want to make sure you stay in touch with me. Thank you, Zephyr. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. I do appreciate that, Zephyr. If you want to stay in touch with me and make sure you don't lose track of this community and these streams, by all means, my advice would be to follow me on Rockfin if you can. But I keep going. We are on Odyssey. We are on Truth Social. We are on Twitter. We are on all platforms, and we are not going to give up so easily. We're not going to give up so easily. So welcome, everybody. So glad that you are here. So, I just want to take a minute at the beginning of this stream to breathe a little bit, to just breathe a little bit, to calm down, Breathe in, breathe out. For those of you who may not be aware, I'm streaming from my bedroom tonight. My wife and I have a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, New York. And we have a living room and we have a bedroom. And often I stream in the living room with the bookshelf behind me, but sometimes I stream in the bedroom with the bedroom behind me. And this is me. I'm sitting on my bed, the bed that my wife and I share. As you can see, this is the light above our bed that my wife and I have. That's what the cord is there. And my wife is in the living room watching TV, very comfortable, relaxing after a hard day's work. I worked from home today, as I have been, doing my reporting as a journalist for RT. I then went to go exercise at the gym. And I checked in with a lot of people about a lot of things that we have going on, and we're certainly going to talk about that. I had a nice meal, and now I'm here streaming with all of you. And I just want to take this time to breathe a little bit, to be calm, because this is a hot summer. It's pretty hot outside here in New York City. I know they're having heat waves across Europe right now. And a lot of people in the summer heat, in the summer allergies, in our current political climate and our current economic climate, I know a lot of people are feeling rage. Rage, frustration, anxiety. And I'm not above that myself. My unique situation is interesting, and I'm really glad to be able to live my life the way I do and to do the work I do. And I remind myself how lucky I am to be in the life circumstances I'm in, but I'm not above that myself. You know, there are times where it just seems overwhelming. There are times when it seems like you just have had enough. There's times when it just seems like you're pushing back against an ocean. And I want the people who are watching this right now who might be feeling that way in the summer heat, I want you to know that you're not feeling that way alone. A lot of us are feeling it right now. A lot of us are stressed out right now. A lot of us are frustrated right now. And if you get on social media, that really comes across. You look at your Twitter page, you look at your Facebook news feed, so many people just are pounding their desks in rage, just are pumped up and angry. And you're definitely not alone. You're definitely not alone if you feel that way. One of the worst things about the pandemic has been that it makes people believe that they are alone, that their frustrations with everyday life, their anxieties about paying their bills, their fears, their concerns, they believe they are alone. Now, we're coming out of this pandemic, we're told. Things are starting to open up, but now they tell us COVID cases are rising again. But a lot of people are convinced they're alone. when they get into this place of feeling like it's them against the world, like they're just completely on their own against all of this, and all the stress that they've got, all the tension that might be existing within their household, all the concerns they have about their jobs, all of this is unique to them, but they're the only one who feels it. Sometimes the worst part can be not the feelings that people feel that are intense, the intense rage that people have, the intense anger and anxiety and fear that people have, but rather the fact that people are ashamed of their emotions. They feel these feelings that are natural and normal and real, but because of the fact that they are embarrassed that they feel this way, because of the fact that they've been told that they shouldn't feel this way, because of the fact that they compare their own life to other people's and say, well, my life is much easier than this person's. Because of that, they feel these feelings, but then the feelings themselves are compounded by shame in feeling these feelings. That they feel these feelings, and then they feel shame that they feel these feelings. And that can be even worse than having intense emotions. If you have intense emotions already, but you then have shame about the fact that you have these intense emotions, that's even worse. It can be difficult. It can be very difficult at times like this. We know the summer heat is having an impact. We know that inflation, the rising cost of gasoline, the rising cost of food, that's affecting people. We know that the insane political atmosphere is affecting people, if there ever was a situation. All right. Wrote it down. We know that people are being hit, and they're being hit pretty hard. We know that. Oh, thank you, Felix. Greetings to you. We know that people are feeling this right now. And we know that this is a tough moment for so many people. And we also know that as the capitalist system is collapsing, there are some genuinely sinister forces that don't want you to feel better, that don't want your family to be in a better situation, that don't want people's anxiety and fears to go away, that don't want things to improve. They rather want to enrage and manipulate the suffering and the anger people have. They want to manipulate that and push it to serve their own ends. We know that's going on. We know that that is happening. We know there are forces that don't want everything to be okay. We know that there are forces that don't want everything to be all right. We know there are forces that don't want you to be able to just live a normal, comfortable life. We know that. And we also know that among our ruling elite, there is tension. Tonight, the January 6th Committee of Congress had yet another hearing to drag Donald Trump through the coals, to remind us, to dredge up memories of January 6th, to remind us of what clearly represented tension within the ruling class. We know that they are not all friends after six, as Ronald Reagan used to say. Ronald Reagan used to say, we're all friends after six. We're all friends after six. They're not all friends after six at this point. The members of Congress, the president, the Supreme Court, the Wall Street, the elite, the owners of Silicon Valley mega corporations, the owners of big super major oil companies, the owners of General Electric, the owners of big Pentagon contractors, the owners of big drug and big pharma companies. These folks are pushing and pulling on each other. They have contrary agendas. They are at each other's throats. They are at each other's throats. And I want to quickly go over what the problem is rooted in. Because look, there's a lot of analysis that calls itself Marxism on the internet these days. A lot of people on the internet blathering and jabbering who call themselves Marxists. And what they espouse isn't Marxism. People get on here and they just say, oh, it's unfair that some people own the factory and some people work in the factory. And so we should have worker cooperatives. That would make it more fair. That ain't Marxism. That might draw from Marxism. There may be aspects of Marxism in that, but that is not Marxism. That is not the Marxist analysis of capitalism. That is not the Marxist critique of capitalism. That's not what it is. And there are some people who get on here and say billionaires have too much money and these corporations have a bunch of wealth and they run the government. That's true, but that's not Marxism. Only Marxism and the scientific understanding of how the capitalist system works that we learn from Marxism. Only Marxism can explain why the world is on fire right now. Only Marxism can explain why in the 21st century, when the capability to produce food is the highest it's ever been, we have such an efficient apparatus of food production, there's going to be a global food crisis pretty soon. Only Marxism can explain that. Only Marxism can explain that. Only Marxism can explain why it is that our leaders are pushing to the brink of a war, not just with Russia, but with China. And it seems like the Biden administration is so determined to escalate international tensions that they don't care how bad the economy gets. They don't care how high the gas prices are. They don't care how long and difficult this crisis becomes. They just seem to be doing everything they possibly can to make things worse. Well, only Marxism and the Marxist understanding of the failures of the capitalist economy, only Marxism can really explain why things are happening the way that they are happening. The Communist Manifesto, that's one of the first texts that people read. If people get into communism, they often start with the Communist Manifesto. I read the Communist Manifesto when I was in 5th grade. I had no idea what it meant. I did not understand it. I had no clear understanding of what it said. And it's not a very good text to start with. If you're very new to all of this text that was written back in 1848 is not the ideal place to start. Not the ideal place to start. It's not the best place to begin. But I'm going to read to you from the Communist Manifesto. Because in the Communist Manifesto, we can find a pretty solid hint about why the world is on fire right now, why we're on the brink of a new world war, why we're on the brink of a food crisis, why it seems that civilization is coming apart. I can point you toward a passage that will help you to understand it, that is not about worker cooperatives, that is not about billionaires having too much money, but is rather about the failure of production organized for profit. I can point you towards that text, and that text will give you something that only Marxism can give you. I'm going to read it to you now. It's from the first section of the Communist Manifesto. Karl Marx writes, "Modern bourgeois society, with its relations of production, of exchange, and of property, a society that has conjured up such gigantic means of production and exchange, is like a sorcerer who is no longer able to control the powers of the nether world, whom he has called up by his spells. For many decades past, the history of industry and commerce is the history of the revolt of modern productive forces against modern conditions of production, against property relations that are conditions for the existence of the bourgeoisie and of productive forces and its rule. It is enough to mention the commercial crises, by their periodic return, put the existence of the entire bourgeois society on its trial, each time more threateningly. In these crises, a great part not only of the existing products, but also of the previously created productive forces are periodically destroyed. In these crises, there breaks out an epidemic that, in all earlier epochs, would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. Society finds itself put back into a state of momentary barbarism. It appears as if a famine, a universal war of devastation, had cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. And why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of the conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions, by which they are fettered, and so soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society, endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to compromise the wealth that created them. And how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. On the other, by the conquest of new markets, and by the more through exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and more destructive crises, and by diminishing the means whereby crises are prevented. The weapons with which the bourgeoisie felled feudalism to the ground are now turned against the bourgeoisie itself. But not only has the bourgeoisie forged the weapons that bring death to itself, it has also called into existence the men who are to wield those weapons, the modern working class, the proletarians. Now, what on earth is Karl Marx talking about in this passage from the Communist Manifesto? A crisis, what did he call it? That in all earlier epochs would have seemed an absurdity. The epidemic of overproduction. A state of momentary barbarism, famine, and universal war of devastation cut off the supply of every means of subsistence. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. Why? Because there's too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, and too much commerce. What in the world is Karl Marx referring to in this passage? What is he talking about? It sounds pretty familiar to all of us who are looking at the modern world. A state of momentary barbarism? That makes sense. We're seeing momentary barbarism. A famine? Well, we're seeing food shortages, malnutrition across Africa, crop failures because of droughts. We're seeing a crisis breaking out. Industry and commerce seem to be destroyed. Why? Because there is too much civilization, too much means of subsistence, too much industry, and too much commerce. The productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions by which they are fettered. And so to overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society. What in the world does this mean? Thank you, Lionel. Much appreciated. What on earth does this mean? Well, what Karl Marx is referring to is the built-in problem of overproduction. I've said it this way many times. We should all be able to say it. We should all be able to explain it to our coworkers, to our fellow students at the university, to our friends, to our family members, to our neighbors. In societies of the past, people were hungry because there was not enough food. In societies of the past, people were homeless because there wasn't enough housing. But it is only under capitalism that people become hungry because there is too much food. They become homeless because there is too much housing. People are cold in the wintertime because there is too much heating gas. This is the problem of overproduction. Under capitalism, the capitalist is trying to make as much profit as he possibly can. And so in order to do that, he needs to produce as many products as he possibly can and pay as little as he possibly can to produce them. He needs to maximize his profits. So the fewer workers that he hires, the more money that he makes. The less he can get away with paying those workers, the more money that he makes. Hire as few people as possible, pay them as little as possible to create as many products as possible, and you will become very, very wealthy as a capitalist. But somebody's got to buy those products. And if the capitalists are all trying to hire as few people as possible, trying to pay them as little as possible for the work that they do, how are they going to buy all the products that you produce? This is the problem of overproduction. The capitalist wants to produce as much as he possibly can and maximize his profits in selling it, maximize his profits from production. But in order to do that, he has to drive down the wages of the worker, hire fewer workers. And so the ability of workers to buy the products goes down. The purchasing power of the worker decreases as the efficiency of capitalist production increases. The more profitable it is to make goods, and the more goods you can churn out, the less the workers are getting paid. And sooner you have a problem of overproduction. This is the built-in self-destructive mechanism of the capitalist system. The problem of overproduction. And it gets exacerbated by something called the tendency of the falling rate of profits. And the tendency of the falling rate of profits is that the capitalist is constantly trying to hire as few workers as he possibly can. So he wants to have as much production as possible be done by machines. But machines do not create surplus value. He can't cut into the value created by the machines in order to get profit. He can't cut into the value of the materials in order to get profit. When the capitalist makes profit, he cuts in to the value put into the product, the percentage of the price of the worker. And so the less and less that a worker is involved in production, the lower and lower the rate of profit that the capitalist makes on each product. There's many examples you can give of this. Capitalism is like a snake eating its own tail. Indeed, there's many examples you can give of this problem. The first example that comes to mind, I guess, is one that I lived. I saw it with my own eyes. That was when I was a college student. This country had a financial crisis, a meltdown. And what was the cause of the meltdown? The meltdown was caused by the fact that the housing bubble burst. The financial crisis of 2008, 2009, as Barack Obama was coming into office, the housing bubble burst. And how did the housing bubble burst? Well, Americans couldn't afford to buy homes any longer. It was that simple. American workers' wages had been going down. The rate of household debt had been rising. The cost of living had been rising, and the good-paying industrial jobs had been eliminated. The service sector was replacing industrial production. Wages were going down. Living standards were going down. The cost of going to college was going up. The cost of medical bills was going up. The cost of health insurance was going up. Americans were getting ripped off to go to college, to get a college education. They were, going into debt for decades. In order to get by in the United States, working families were struggling and getting less and less pay, working in service sector jobs. And living standards, the average income and the amount of wealth that an average family has significantly decreased. It's gone down. And when people are poor, they cannot afford to keep buying homes like they once did. But a lot of the economy is based on building homes. Think about it. You've got the people who construct the home. You've got the steel corporations that manufacture the steel for the home. You've got the lumber corporations that manufacture the lumber for the home. You got the electrical corporations that manufacture the electrical, the wiring of the home. Every home involves all kinds of industries. And a big section of the U.S. economy is homes being built, homes being renovated, people buying homes. That is a huge section of the American economy, of any economy. Housing is an essential thing. So the fact that Americans couldn't afford to keep buying homes like they once had, the family home with the white picket fence, the American dream, people just couldn't afford to keep buying homes. That was causing big financial problems. Because if people stop buying homes, then the economy crashes. Then all those people who make the bricks for the home are going to lose their jobs. All the people who make the wood for the homes are going to lose their jobs. All the people who make the steel for the homes are going to lose their jobs. All the people who make the wiring for the homes are going to lose their jobs. All the realtors who sell the homes are going to lose their jobs. I mean, if people stop buying homes at the rate that they normally do, you're going to have a big economic problem. Homes are a big chunk of the economy. Housing. Everyone wants to have a roof over their head. But Americans just couldn't afford to keep buying homes. So you had Alan Greenspan at the Federal Reserve. And he came forward and he said, all right. He looked at the data. He saw that Americans just couldn't afford to keep buying homes like they once did. And he said, this is a problem. This is a big problem. So I am going to legalize all kinds of lending practices so we can lend money to Americans to keep buying homes, to make sure they keep buying homes. And he deregulated lending. And he legalized all kinds of practices that would keep Americans buying homes, even though Americans couldn't afford to keep buying homes at the same rate. They talked about, these inflatable mortgages that, for the first 2 years, you're paying a certain rate, and then it suddenly blows up 3 times as much. They talked about all kinds of nasty lending practices. Predatory lending was the term that we started to hear in 2007 and 2008. Predatory lending. That in order to keep people buying homes, and in order to keep the banks lending money to people to buy homes, because generally people can't afford a home once, they get a loan to do it. They had to legalize all kinds of lending practices that had previously been illegal. In rates where, have the home for 2 or 3 years, you pay it off, and then all of a sudden you have to pay 3 times as much. Or there were many examples of predatory lending practices. These lending practices that resulted in enabling Americans to keep buying homes despite the fact that their incomes had gone down significantly. They kept the economy going for a few years. But then in 2006, 2000, we've been seeing a rate of home foreclosure. Michigan is where I was in the summer of 2008. I was working on a campaign to stop home foreclosure in the state of Michigan. And I walked through entire neighborhoods that were empty, pretty much. Every home had been Cleveland was devastated by it. Neighborhoods in California was devastated by it. Home foreclosures started happening all across the United States of America. Americans would lose their homes because of these rip-off loans that got legalized by Alan Greenspan. Where did these rip loans come from? Rips came from the fact that Americans couldn't afford to keep buying and people money to buy. Americans couldn't afford to pay them. In order for the bankers to be able to keep lending Americans money to buy homes, had to be enabled all kinds of rip-off schemes in order to keep Americans buying homes. But it only worked so long. Only worked for so long. Eventually, banks were failing. Banks were collapsing. Banks were collapsing. The government was shutting down. It was a disaster. Banks were failing. Homes were foreclosed. Why? Why were homes foreclosed? Why were banks failing? Well, it was because there was too much housing. It's because there was too much housing. That was really the issue. There was too much housing. There was too much housing. And Americans couldn't afford to keep buying housing because there was too much housing and Americans couldn't afford to keep buying it. And the economy came to a grinding halt and banks collapsed and got bailed out by the government, and it was a disaster. Why? Why? There were too many houses. There were too many houses. That's why the economy was failing. There were too many couldn't afford to buy them. And actually, in a number of cities, you saw, I kid you not, you saw in a number of cities where people who'd lost their homes became homeless. And outside of Las Vegas, Nevada, there were all kinds of people living in tents because they'd lost their home. And in other cities, you had people living in tents, little Hoovervilles. You know, you go to Skid Row in Los Angeles. There's all kinds of tents, homeless encampments springing up. Why were these encampments springing up? Why were all these people becoming homeless? They were becoming homeless because there are too many houses. That's why they became homeless, because there are too many houses. That is the problem of overproduction. The problem of overproduction. People were becoming homeless People were losing their homes. People were losing their jobs. People were hungry because there was too much food. People were homeless because there was too much housing. That is the capitalist system in its essence. I mean, there's another analogy that's much shorter that I can talk about, which is the famous coal miner's riddle. The coal miner's riddle. The coal miner's riddle. You know, the little boy in the winter says to his father, "Why is it so cold?" The father says, "It's cold because we cannot afford to buy any coal to heat the stove." And the little boy says, "Why can we not afford any coal to heat the stove?" And the father says, "Because I lost my job at the coal mine. I got laid off." The little boy says, "Father, why did you lose your job at the coal mine?" And the father says, "Because there's too much coal." That's capitalism. And never before in the history of human civilization have we had this problem. Never before have we ever had this problem in the history of civilization. It is a completely new problem. It is unique to the capitalist system. Poverty created by abundance. Poverty amid plenty. This is a uniquely capitalist problem. And it gets exacerbated by technological leaps. When the capitalist makes a great leap in technology and suddenly is able to produce more goods more efficiently than ever before, and suddenly is able to hire fewer workers than ever before, and when there's a great technological leap in the capitalist economy, there tends to then follow up a great economic crisis. Back in the 1870s and 1880s, you had crises like this all the time. All the time they had crises like this. Panics. They would call them panics on the stock market. They were having a panic on the stock market. And the economy would crash, and then it would start to get going again. And the Federal Reserve Bank was created in the early years of the 20th century. J.P. Morgan and others came together and they said, we need some mechanism for stabilizing the capitalist economy to prevent this from happening. So they started using the Federal Reserve to pump money in and out of the economy, to set interest rates. That was the idea. You still had these problems. They didn't happen as frequently, but they still happened. The Great Depression was the result of great technological leaps. People may not know this, but before the Great Depression, there was an expression people used to use. They used to say, Ford has overtaken Marx, or Ford has defeated Marx. I don't know if you've ever heard this before. Ford has defeated Marx, or Ford has overtaken Marx. During the 1920s, this was a widespread expression. And they said, well, Karl Marx said that capitalism was unsustainable. It was going to lead to economic progress. But that's baloney, because this guy named Henry Ford, Ford Motor Company, the car manufacturing guy, he has invented assembly line production. He's invented ways of paying his workers higher wages so they can afford his cars. And Henry Ford has proved this new advanced technological form of capitalism that has defeated Marxism. And so, Marx claimed that capitalism was doomed to fail, but Ford has defeated Marx. That was a widespread expression. They said it in the newspapers. They said it all kinds of places. Ford has defeated Marx. But then the economy crashed in 1929. And people stopped saying that. And the Great Depression. People were hungry on the streets. People were starving. And they kept saying it's going to get better. The market will just naturally fix this problem. And it didn't. It didn't. And they said, well, you know, economy slows down for a little bit, but it'll get going again. But it didn't. The Great Depression started officially in the United States in 1929. It didn't end in 1930. It didn't end in 1931. Didn't end in 1932. Didn't end in 1933. Didn't end in 1934. The Great Depression was a prolonged capitalist crisis that was caused by the technological leaps of industrial production. That capitalism had been able to produce refrigerators, many the worker, play line because of the fact all rates had spawned the breakdown of capitalism. And it was only the Second World War that ultimately saved capitalism. The prolonged capitalist crisis. The prolonged capitalist crisis It was only the Second World War, in which every major city in Western Europe was destroyed, in which millions and millions of people died. It was only the Second World War that could stabilize the capitalist system and bring it back to order. It was only the Second World War and mass destruction on a global scale that could get the capitalist economy going again. An episode of mass destruction stabilized capitalism. That was the only thing that could save the capitalist system. And during the Second World War, we saw the very beginning of the next economic crisis. The seeds of the next economic crisis were planted. We all know about Alan Turing and his decoder machine. Now, Alan Turing developed a decoding machine during World War II. It was essentially an early computer. It was a huge breakthrough in terms of mathematics, in terms of computing. Alan Turing's decoder machine laid the basis for what later happened with IBM, what later happened with Apple, and the computer revolution of the late 70s, early 80s, up into the 90s. The computer revolution, the great technological leaps that enable me to be talking to you right now over the internet. All of these things were spawned by the Second World War, spawned by the capitalist system. And it is these technological leaps that lay the basis for the crisis that we're currently facing. The reason that our economy is in a prolonged crisis is because of the fact that technology has advanced to far greater heights than have ever been imagined. That is the reason that our economy is in crisis. Because under capitalism, the only value the worker has is his ability to sell himself to his boss. And if the capitalist isn't selling himself to his boss, he has no value. The boss has to buy him, to rent him out. And so the fewer workers you hire, the less money those workers are going to have to spend. And the more the capitalist system advances, the more technology increases, the more unemployment you're going to have. And that's why Andrew Yang was talking about the threat of self-driving cars. Self-driving cars would lead to riots in the streets and mass unemployment. All the truck drivers would lose their jobs. All the cab drivers would lose their jobs. All the chauffeurs would lose their jobs. There is no room for millions of workers at the global assembly line. They have created an apparatus of production in the 21st century that is so efficient and so advanced, they can churn out products like never before. They can produce iPods and iPhones like never before. Amazing technological progress. And as a result of that, poverty is rising. That is the problem that we are facing on the global scale, is that the capitalist system cannot handle the technological advances that have been created by the computer revolution. This is the built-in self-destruction of capitalism. The song Solidarity Forever has a line, "We stand outcast and starving mid the wonders we have made." That's the problem. Capitalism is a system of production organized for profit. The capitalists operate the banks and the factories and the centers of economic power in order to advance their own profits. It's the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market. They don't make food so people can eat it. They make food so agribusiness and big box stores can make money selling it. They don't have houses so people can live in them. They have houses so that landlords and bankers can make money off of them. This is the capitalist system. Under capitalism, the means of production only function as preliminary transformation into capital. Meaning things don't get done unless it advances the profits of the capitalist. If the capitalist is not going to make money from new housing being built, then it doesn't get built. If the capitalist is not going to make money from new food being produced, then it doesn't get produced. Profits are in command. That is the capitalist system. Production organized for profit. That is the definition of capitalism. When the means of production function in order to make profits for private owners, when the economy is run by private enterprises that are profit-centered and make profits for their owners, that is capitalism. Capitalism is the anarchy of production. It is production organized for profit. And production organized for profit has this built-in problem of overproduction, this built-in problem of the tendency of the falling rate of profit, this built-in mechanism of self-destruction that Karl Marx talks about in the Communist Manifesto. And how do they resolve it? It's one thing to have an economic crisis every couple years, like in Marx's day, but how does it resolve a long-term economic crisis? Well, we saw what happened during the Great Depression. You had a huge war, and that resolved it. When the tendency of the rate of profit to fall and the problem of overproduction are exacerbated, when you have a prolonged crisis of capitalism, the capitalists begin fighting with each other because they all want the economy to get better. They all want the other capitalists to be the ones to fix it. They want the state to step in and try and stabilize the economy. They want the state to come in and take action that'll get people spending money. They want the state to hire people to build things. They want the state to give out money, and they want the state to fix the economy. But they want it to be at the expense of the other capitalists. They don't want it to be their taxes that go up. They don't want it to be their property that gets nationalized. They don't want it to be at their expense. So the capitalists begin fighting with each other and forming blocks among each other and battling for power among each other. And that's what happens in a capitalist economic crisis, is the capitalists begin fighting with each other and scrambling for power and pushing on each other, trying to take control of the state and use the state, the government, to stabilize the economy. That's what happens in a capitalist crisis, and this is called Bonapartism. In France in 1851, you had a long-term economic crisis. There was one faction called the Party of Order, and they were the conservatives and the right-wingers. And then there was another faction centered around Louis Bonaparte. And Louis Bonaparte became the military dictator. And a lot of the wealthy capitalists who were part of the Party of Order got exiled. They got kicked out of the country. And Louis Bonaparte started trying to stabilize the capitalist economy. He built big railroads, and he forced the capitalists to have a 12-hour workday. And he created hospitals for poor people. And he was doing things that would bring stability to society. He saw that poverty was increasing. The poor people were rising up and rioting, and they were hungry. And so his faction, Louis Bonaparte's faction of the ruling class, took control and used the government to build these railroads, to build these hospitals, to regulate industry, to try and stabilize the economy. That's called Bonapartism. When one section of the ruling class uses the state to try and stabilize the economy. Now, Marx was living in Paris at the time, and he wrote a great pamphlet on this called The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, observing directly what happened when this coup happened and how Louis Bonaparte seized control of the government. And Marx wrote about it, and he said, this isn't a revolution. This isn't socialism. This is one faction of the ruling class seizing the government and using it for its own ends. And yes, FDR was also a Bonapartist, but Hitler was a Bonapartist. Mussolini was a Bonapartist. All Bonapartism is one faction of the ruling class seizing control of the government and using the force of the state to try and stabilize the economy. That's all Bonapartism is. There are different forms of Bonapartism. FDR was a progressive Bonapartist. Why? Well, FDR seized control of the government, and he used it to build infrastructure, to pass progressive labor unions, labor reforms, to support organized labor, to create Social Security. He did things that built the economy up and increased technological advancement, increased the level of education in society, increased the living conditions of the people in order to stabilize capitalism. That's a progressive form of Bonapartism. Louis Napoleon, he was a progressive Bonapartist. But Hitler was also a Bonapartist. But what made Hitler different than FDR? Why is it that Hitler was one kind of Bonapartist and FDR was another kind? Because Hitler tried to stabilize the German economy with degrowth. Hitler tried to stabilize the German economy with degrowth. Let me read to you from that passage I just read. Marx is writing about this economic crisis. He writes, the productive forces at the disposal of society no longer tend to further the development of conditions of bourgeois property. On the contrary, they have become too powerful for these conditions by which they are fettered. So as soon as they overcome these fetters, they bring disorder into the whole of bourgeois society and endanger the existence of bourgeois property. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth they created. So how does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? This is very important. How does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. And on the other hand, by the conquest of new markets and more thorough exploitation of the old ones. Now, what is the enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces? That is called degrowth, reducing consumption, driving down living standards. In Nazi Germany, when the Hitler-aligned faction of the ruling class took power, led by Hjalmar Schacht, the banker who was aligned with Hitler, what did they do? They seized control of the government, and then they rounded up all the communists and all the social democrats, and they put them in labor camps and had them do forced labor. And when they put all these people in prison camps, they were suddenly not out looking for jobs. So, millions of people being put in prison camps made it easier to find a job for the people who weren't in the prison camps. Also, in addition to that, very good. Very good, Antonio. In addition to that, many people got jobs running these prison camps. And in addition to that, these prison camps did free labor for corporations. The government would have them go work for Volkswagen, have them go work for a company, a steel manufacturer. And creating an economy with slave labor being widespread, creating the world's first prison industrial complex, was a mechanism through which Hitler's faction of the ruling class, led by Hjalmar Schacht, the banker, could stabilize the capitalist economy. But it meant taking a bunch of people who were free, who were workers, and making them slaves in the concentration camp system. That is called degrowth. And also, what did Hitler do? He began sterilizing and eventually exterminating disabled people. And what else did Hitler do? He restarted military spending. Spending money on bombs and tanks and weapons, withdrawing from the Versailles Treaty, rebuilding the German military. And these Bonapartist maneuvers that the Nazis engaged in, setting up a network of prison camps, putting millions of people into those prison camps. For the first 2 years of the Nazi regime, there were millions of people that were doing forced labor in these prison camps, living as slaves, giving their labor to corporations, having people be hired to be the guards of these prison camps. All of this laid the basis for stabilizing the capitalist economy. Degrowth. You took a bunch of people that were free working people and you degrew them to slave labor conditions. And you invested a lot of government money on weapons and bombs and tanks. This is degrowth. And then you started taking people among the population that you consider to be undesirable. And you start wiping them out. Disabled people, you start sterilizing them. You reduce the birth rate. That was one thing the Nazis did. They reduced the birth rate. They started actively trying to prevent groups of people they did not like disabled people, like gypsies, like Jews. They started preventing them from having children. And doing this stabilized the capitalist economy to some extent or other. Now, it didn't ultimately work. By 1939, Nazi Germany was in an economic crisis once again, because it only worked for so long and the problems of capitalism continued. But it was an attempt to stabilize the capitalist economy with degrowth. This is what fascism is. Fascism is a particular form of Bonapartism that involves crushing the labor movement, driving down living standards, reducing the population in order to stabilize the capitalist economy. That is the essence of fascism. Fascism is not uniforms. Fascism is not when people are mean to other people. Fascism is an attempt to stabilize capitalism with degrowth. It is a destructive form of Bonapartism. Now, I'm not going to be quizzed on here. It's a destructive form of Bonapartism. A destructive form of Bonapartism. You can read R. Palm Dutt and his great book, Fascism and the Social Revolution. This is the essence of fascism. Stabilizing the capitalist economy by trying to degrow. This is the essence of fascism. And it's referenced in the Communist Manifesto. The conditions of bourgeois society are too narrow to comprise the wealth created by them. What? Too much wealth has been created, and that leads to an economic crisis, which is insane, right? Why are people hungry because there are too many houses? There's too much wealth has been created by capitalism, and so it's leading to all these economic problems. So how does the bourgeoisie get over the crisis? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. But what's the other one? And on the other, by the conquest of new markets and by more thorough exploitation of the old ones. That is to say, by paving the way for more extensive and destructive crises, and by diminishing the means by which crises are prevented. In the 1990s, early 90s, around the time the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a jobless recovery. Around the time of the Gulf War. People remember this? There was a jobless recovery. It's part of the reason that Bill Clinton got elected. The Gulf War had happened. George Bush Sr. was president. And the economy was grinding into a halt. It wasn't doing well. And Bill Clinton got elected. They said it's the economy's stupid, right? But he got in there and he said to George Bush, how much does a loaf of bread cost? And George Bush didn't know. And then Bill Clinton got into office. And in the 1990s, the economy got better. Why did the economy get better in the 1990s? because the Soviet Union fell. The conquest of new markets. All of a sudden, instead of having Russia and the surrounding countries as a force of opposition, as a competitor on the global markets, Russia turned into Wall Street's playground. Russia wasn't producing its own food anymore. The collective farm system was put out of business. So American agribusiness got to start selling Russia a bunch of food. Russia wasn't producing its own steel anymore. All the steel mills, the state-run steel mills, they got bought up by American firms and then closed down. And Russia wasn't producing its own steel mills, so American corporations got to sell them their steel. And all across Eastern Europe, Romania, Czechoslovakia, free market neoliberalism wrecked these countries' economies. They stopped producing their own goods. They weren't producing steel anymore. They weren't producing their own food. And suddenly, American capitalism got a new boost forward. And what was that boost they got? It was based on the conquest of new markets. Because suddenly there were all kinds of people buying their products. Russia used to make its own steel. Well, now it was buying their steel. Romania and Czechoslovakia used to grow their own food. Now they're buying their food. And it was the conquest of new markets that stabilized the capitalist economy in the 1990s. Neoliberalism in Eastern Europe, the conquest of new markets, solved the economic crisis. The overthrow of socialism and the imposition of neoliberal capitalism and the wrecking of the productive capacity of the countries of the former socialist bloc enabled the capitalist system to restart itself again. And then in Latin America, they started doing the same thing. NAFTA, Bill Clinton signed NAFTA. And suddenly, all the Mexican farmers were put out of business. Mexican folks have been growing their own food since long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. Long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. And Haitians have been growing their own food. And people in Guatemala and people in Honduras have been growing their own food. But under NAFTA, suddenly, American agribusiness was able to go to Mexico and undercut all those Mexican farmers, sell them food at way cheaper, put those Mexican farmers out of business. And pretty soon, all the Mexican farmers were shutting down. And instead of growing its own food, Mexico was importing its own food. And Mexico was importing food from the United States. The conquest of new markets. That's what the United States did to Mexico. They conquered their market. And Haiti, Haitians had farms, they grew their own foods, but under NAFTA, Bill Clinton went in there and American agribusiness put them down, and now Haitians import their food from the United States. The conquest of new markets. This is capitalism. There should be farms all over Mexico, but there aren't farms all over Mexico because the Mexican farmers have all gone out of business. And they're importing their food from the United States. You can read about it in the New York Times. My debate with Destiny, I brought it up. Destiny insisted, oh, no, this can't be true. Well, it is true. I read it to him from the New York Times. The conquest of new markets. One of the main ways you conquer new markets is with war. If Russia, which is a major oil and gas exporter, which is a major agricultural power at this point. They're having the biggest harvests in their history. Putin rebuilt the farming sector. If Putin rebuilt their industries. Putin has turned Russia once again into a major competitor. Importing American oil and gas, selling oil and gas on competition with London. Russia's not importing American food. Russia is producing more of their own food than they've ever produced before. Russia has huge steel mills and huge titanium manufacturing corporations. And so, in a desperate attempt to stabilize the capitalist economy, and you've got Joe Biden going all in to crush this competitor, to stabilize the capitalist economy with the conquest of new markets. How dare those Russians be producing their own oil and gas? How dare those Russians have their own farms? How dare those Russians have their own steel. They should be buying their steel from us. They should be buying their oil from us. They should be buying their food from us. How dare they? And the same with China. Nancy Pelosi is headed for Taiwan. Why? Because that'll piss off China. They are hoping they can provoke a situation where China has to retake Taiwan. And then they can move in and try to crush China. And why do they want to crush China? Because how dare China make their own iPhones? How dare, Huawei technology make better phones than the United States? How dare China make half the steel in the world? They shouldn't be making steel. They should be buying their steel from us. Damn it. How dare China make their own copper? How dare China lift millions of people out of poverty by building up their own industries and raising their own productive capacity? The capitalists are openly pushing us to the brink of World War III because they need the conquest of new markets. The conquest of new markets to stabilize their economy. This is the built-in problem of capitalism. And why are they pushing degrowth on us? Why are they driving our wages down? Why are they telling us that we should be poorer, that we should have less, that we should use less energy? Is it because they just want to save the environment? Of course not. Of course they don't want to save the environment. If they wanted to save the environment, they'd be investing in fusion energy. They'd be pushing to get us beyond fossil fuels like China is doing, but they're not doing that. No. Why are they pushing degrowth on us? Because they want the enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces. They want to do what Hitler did. They want to stabilize the economy by driving down conditions. They want to reduce the population. They want to reduce living standards. Fascism and war walk hand in hand because they are both mechanisms through which the capitalists can stabilize their economies. How does the bourgeoisie get over these crises? On the one hand, by enforced destruction of a mass of productive forces, degrowth. On the other hand, by the conquest of new markets, war. The breakdown of the capitalist system due to the computer revolution and the technological advances is forcing the capitalist rulers of the United States, the billionaire monopolists, the bankers, the oil corporations, the Silicon Valley fascists, the owners of companies like General Electric and Raytheon and Boeing, it is forcing them into a situation where the only hope they have for restoring their profits is degrowth and war, fascism and war. But I maintain that there is an alternative to fascism and war. When the capitalist system comes to a grinding halt, because the capitalists don't make any profits any longer, there's an alternative. We could instead have a government of action that fights for working families. We could have a government that comes in and says, we're going to put the oil under public ownership, and the profits from the oil will go into the public budget. Oh, well, the capitalist economy is causing the country to be crumbling. We're going to hire millions of unemployed people and put them to work rebuilding the country. Oh, we're having a bit of an issue with the banks and lending. Well, we're going to put credit and the lending of money into the hands of the state to be done strategically. We're going to create a national bank and monopolize the lending of money in the hands of the state. Oh, we're going to enact an economic bill of rights to make sure that every American has a job and healthcare and education. If we had a government of action that fought for working families, a government that saw its job as ensuring growth and was not concerned about protecting the rights of capitalists. It didn't care about those oil capitalists. Who cares about those oil capitalists, right? Well, we're going to nationalize your product. We're going to make oil public property because it ought to be the property of every American, right? If you are born in this country, the oil underneath the soil should be just as much yours as it is Rockefeller's or Carnegie's or DuPont's. Oh, we don't care about the private property of those bankers. We're going to tell them you're out of business. No more private lending of money. We're going to have a state monopoly on the lending of money. And we're going to enact an economic bill of rights. And we're going to rebuild America. We had a government that was not concerned. Thank you, Austin. That was not concerned with protecting the rights of private property, but was more concerned about protecting the lives of working people. We had a government of action that fought for working families, that moved in to take dramatic economic measures to stabilize the economy and continue growth and ensure that growth would continue. We could have a strong economy once again. But it would require going beyond capitalism. It would require moving toward socialism. It would require moving in the direction of a government, a worker and farmer government that would control the economy and ensure that growth continued, to control the means of production. Socialism is when society controls the means of production, when the banks and the factories and the industries and the centers of economic power are operated and controlled by society for the benefit of the people, not the profits of a wealthy few. When the means of production are organized to serve public good and not profits, that's socialism. And socialism has a market in a lot of cases. Vietnam, China, Cuba, they've got a market in socialism. They have private businesses, but those private businesses and the anarchy of production is not in command. Those private businesses don't run government policy. Those private businesses are directed by the state. Production is organized for public good and not the profits of a few. I don't think so. That's what socialism is. Socialism is when the anarchy of production is overturned and the means of production, the centers of economic power, are forced to work in the interest of all society. It's when the people control the means of production. I'll read you again from the Communist Manifesto. Marx is describing this problem of production organized for profit, leading to these big economic crises. What does he say is the solution? He says the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class and win the battle for democracy. A government of the people, of the workers, a workers' government. Raise the working class, those of us who sell our labor power in order to survive. Raise the working class to the level of the working class. Put the workers, the people who produce the wealth of the country, in control of the government. Win the battle for democracy. And then the proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, meaning you don't have the anarchy of production anymore. The state is centralizing production, directing production so that growth can continue. No longer the anarchy of production, abolishing the anarchy of production, but centralizing production in the hands of the state, and increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible. And this, of course, cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property. That's right. Those oil companies are going to be told, look, buddy, we don't respect your right to be private property. The oil, the wealth of the country, needs to be used for the benefit of the country. Sorry, despotic inroads on the rights of private property. Right? The banks are going to be told, nope, you're not allowed to lend money at interest anymore. We're going to have a state bank that will assign credit strategically in the interest of the country. Well, That's a despotic inroad on the rights of the bankers. And these measures will, of course, be different in different countries. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. What does that mean? That the way they do it in China is not the way we're going to do it over here. The way they do it in Venezuela is not the way we're going to do it over here. The way that they do it, writing it down, the way they do it in Cuba is not the way we're going to do it over here. It's going to be different in different countries. Socialism everywhere will have a unique characteristic. It'll have American characteristics. When it happens here, it will be socialism with American characteristics. That's the message. The working people of this country must begin to mobilize in their own interests, assert their own economic demands, build up their own community organizations, fight for their own needs. We need what Fred Hampton did. He organized the working people of Chicago, black, white, Arab, Asian, Latino, into a rainbow coalition. He set up a free breakfast program. Thank you. Free breakfast program. He was teaching Marxism. It's kind of like what the Communist Party did in the 1930s with the unemployment councils, creating an organization of working class community power, working people coming together to assert their own interests, to care for each other while pushing an ideology and a program. That's what needs to be done. So there you go, folks. That's why we're in the situation we're in. That's why our leaders are driving us toward war. That's why our leaders are driving us toward degrowth. That's why capitalism offers only fascism and war. And that's why we ultimately need society as a whole to come together. Now, I've put forward the notion of a united front against the imperialists. We need organized labor and small business owners and working people in the communities, unemployed, etc., to come together around a program to rescue the country. A united front against the imperialists. And that is why, dun-dun-dun, that is why, hold on, the name of the conference we are having, the name of the conference that we are having in Chicago. What is the name of the conference? Unite against the imperialists. Unite against the imperialists. We need a united front against the imperialists to emerge. Small business owners, labor unionists, members of the military, unemployed people, all of them need to form a solid block. A solid block to resist the forces pushing war and fascism. The forces that are pushing war and fascism in the United States are the big monopolies, the big banks, the big oil companies, the Silicon Valley fascists, the imperialists, the big corporations and banks that have their tentacles all across the planet, that can only stabilize their system with enforced destruction, as well as the conquering of new markets, who are taking us to the brink of a new world war in order to stabilize their system. The imperialists They are the enemy. And everyone except the very, very rich would benefit from a government of action that fights for working families. Every community would benefit from having better roads and better hospitals and better water purification and better power plants. Every community would benefit from that. Every community would benefit from having the oil and natural resources wealth go back into the community, not into the pockets of Wall Street elites. Every community would benefit from having a national bank that assigned credit strategically to build up the economy, to raise the productive forces. Every community would benefit from every person there having a job, having health care and education. This would benefit the small business owner. It would benefit the military. It would benefit the labor unions. It would benefit the unemployed and the desperately poor. Better trains, better power plants, better schools. Rebuilding America with a government that's not afraid to have despotic inroads on the rights of private property. It's not afraid to kick the ass of the oil companies, not afraid to kick the ass of the bankers, not afraid to kick the ass of Big Pharma, not afraid to kick the ass of the insurance cartels, right? A government that's backed up by a movement of people in the streets that's ready to punch, that's ready to fight back, and isn't afraid to kick Rockefeller's ass, isn't afraid to punch Bill Gates in the mouth. A government of action that says, damn it, if your profits and your markets aren't going to make the economy better, we're going to do it by force. We're going to do it by force of will. The people are going to come together and we're going to force this economy to do better. I don't care if your markets and your stock markets and your derivative ripoff schemes aren't doing it. If we come together and we have a strong government, we're going to force this economy to do better. A government of action that fights for working families. That would require building a united front against the imperialists. Not everybody in that united front is going to be a communist. Not everyone in that united front is going to have one view or the other. Not everyone in that united front is going to see things the exact same way. But the only hope we have for saving America and the world from the nightmare of degrowth, fascism, and war is the construction of a united front against the imperialists. That's really the only hope that we have. So that's why our conference is called Unite Against the Imperialists. That's why we're calling it that, because that is the only way we get out of this. We need something like the Bolivarian revolutions of Latin America, something like what the Chinese communists did in 1949, something like what Daniel Ortega has done in Nicaragua, something like what Putin did in Russia when he got their economy going again in the 90s. We need a government of action that will fight for working families and isn't afraid to step on the rights of private capitalists in order to do it. All right? I just read to you. I mean, this is what communism is all about. I don't know where. I mean, people think, I tweeted out the other day that I almost get embarrassed. I almost get embarrassed to call myself a communist because people think that being a communist, it means that you're like 13 years old and you're obsessed with LGBT stuff and you think all Republicans are Nazis and I want all the Republicans to be taken out and shot because I'm triggered that they exist. That's not what a communist is. Antifa are not communists. Those people want to kill me, right? Marxism and socialism is about workers' power. That's what it's about, folks. That's what it's about. But listen, we're having this conference, Unite Against the Imperialists. And it's going to be a good conference. It's going to be a good conference. But I hate to say this. I just have to say it. There's no way around this. We're in a bit of a tight of a financial squeeze. All right. We are in a bit of a financial squeeze. All right. We thought it was going to, there's some issues going on. I can't get into the specifics about it. You don't talk about things related to your job and stuff like that on the internet, but things are not going as well as we hoped that they might go. And this conference is still going to happen. This conference is definitely happening. This conference will happen. No question about it. This conference is going to happen. Tara Reade is going to speak. Garland Nixon is going to speak. Peter Coffin is going to speak. Dan Kovalik is going to speak. This conference is going to happen. But it's not going to happen as smoothly as we thought it might. We're being hit with some extra expenses. On top of that, there's some other stuff I can't get into, some financing issues. We could really use your help. The people who've donated, I really appreciated it. And if you want to make a special gift to make this conference happen, we could really use it. We could really use it. And the best way to just send us a gift right now to make sure this conference happens is CPI Events on Cash App. I'm putting it in the chat. CPI Events on Cash App. If you can just send us a gift right now, it would make our lives a lot easier, right? It's going to happen. The conference is going to happen. I did the math today in my head, and I thought about this and that, and I made some phone. It's going to happen. But it would really, really help us. It would ease some of the stress that I've got in the coming weeks if you could make a contribution. CPI Events on Cash App. It would make my life a little bit easier, and it would probably improve the quality of the conference. It will improve the quality of the conference if folks could help us out. I don't know what people are capable of doing. I know inflation's hitting people pretty hard, etc. But if people could help us out, it would make our lives less stressful. It'll make the conference go more smoothly. Now, the videos of the conference are going to be up immediately afterwards. It took a long time for the Austin videos to get up, but this time we're going to have a method so they go boom, and they get edited, and they get put up. Boom. You know what I mean? We're going to make sure they go up much quicker. We've got... it's going to be good. It's going to be a good conference. But if you can help us out, if you got Cash App, if you just want to shoot us a gift, that will make our lives easier. And Cash App is the best way. I suppose you can Zelle me. If you want to Zelle me a contribution, you can also, is there any Cash App way to donate? Yeah, you can send me on Zelle if you have Zelle with your bank. I'm Caleb Maupin at Gmail. On Zelle. You can shoot me a contribution on Zelle. That's another way you can help me out. So if you want to shoot us a Zelle contribution, that would be fine. Yeah, that's probably the best hope we got at the moment. We could use your help in putting this conference on. If you can't do anything, that's how these things work. But it would be great if you could help us out. So I just wanted folks to be aware of that. It's going to be a great conference. Be there. Maybe you can't send us a contribution. Just be there. Just be there. Just you being there in and of itself is going to mean a lot. It's going to mean a lot to Tara Reade. It's going to mean a lot to Dan Kovalik. It's going to mean a lot to Peter Coffin. It's going to mean a lot to Garland Nixon. It'll mean a lot to our musician who's coming in from out of town. It's going to be a great conference. There need to be conferences like this happening all over the country. We at the Center for Political Innovation, we are laying the basis for the consciousness that will build this. So if you can help us out, that would be great. And if you can just be there, just come. If you can just find a way to get yourself to Chicago, that would be great. That would be awesome because it's going to be a great conference. Everyone who went to Austin remembers what it was like. It was really something special. And everybody who was at our retreat in Kansas, it was something special. And, this is going to be great. So if you can help us out with the conference, great. If you can just show up and be there, it's going to be great. We are going to do the best. We're doing the best we can. Our tasks are gargantuan tasks. These are not small tasks ahead of us. Okay. And these are not small tasks, but They're important tasks. We are laying the basis, the consciousness for what is to come. One thing I keep coming back to is the Great Awakening. Before the American Revolution, there was a moment of spiritual awakening in U.S. history. It was called the Great Awakening. It was the consciousness of the people was preparing for the fight ahead. And then we had the Second Great Awakening. And the Second Great Awakening is a moment that was so pivotal in American history. So many things that have just become part of our culture in America can be traced back to the Second Great Awakening. For example, tent revival preaching. That comes from the Second Great Awakening. The song Amazing Grace. I'm sure you've heard the song Amazing Grace. That comes from the Second Great Awakening. Trying to think what else. Mormonism, Seventh-day Adventism, that comes from the Second Great Awakening. John Brown was a religious revolutionary, a religious abolitionist who was opposed to slavery. He was part of the Second Great Awakening, and that's where he got his spiritual devotion to the opposition to slavery. The Second Great Awakening was this great moment, and it wasn't the Second American Revolution. That wasn't it. The Second American Revolution came later. It came 20 to 30 years later, but it was the Second Great Awakening that laid the basis among the population. It laid the basis among the population. It got a group of people together, millions of Americans, became full of religious fervor and opposition to slavery. The Second Great Awakening was anti-slavery. It was an anti-slavery religious awakening all throughout America. And what was interesting was that slavery in America was deeply embedded in the country. Wall Street was doing business with slavery. Slave trade and the slave plantation system of the South was a big part of our legal system. And one of the beautiful things about the Second Great Awakening, this mass anti-slavery movement of religious fervor that swept the United States, the emphasis was not on good people versus bad people. The emphasis of the Second Great Awakening was on redemption. It was on the idea that you can have done something wrong. You can have done something wrong, but it's not too late to turn around. It's not too late to repent. Right? The Second Great Awakening, we know that song Amazing Grace was written by a slave trader who realized that slavery was wrong. And he was on this slave ship, headed to Africa to get some slaves, get some African people and enslave them. Then a storm came. And in this storm, he feared for his life, and he had a moment of clarity. And he said, slavery, enslaving people, is not moral. So he turned the ship around, abandoned the slave trade. That was a huge part of the Second Great Awakening. It was the idea that if you've done something wrong, if you're involved in evil, it's not too late. If you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, it's not too late. If you are in an awful relationship, it's not too late. You can start over. You can change. You can turn around, and it's not easy, and it's frightening. It's scary. You've been living a certain way for so long. If you've been living a certain way for so long, someone comes along and says, you can change. You don't want to hear it because this is the way you've always been living. But there comes a moment. There comes a moment where you realize that the way you're living is leading you down a road that ain't good. It's leading you toward a place that's going to destroy you. And that you have really no choice but to turn around. And if you don't turn around, you're going to be heading off a cliff. It's time to stop using drugs. It's time to get out of that abusive relationship. It's time to get a new job. It's time to stop living contrary to your conscience. Get out of the slave trade. That was the message of the Second Great Awakening. But what was interesting was that really what the Second Great Awakening was saying for individuals, this message of redemption, come and get baptized, get saved, repent of your sins, turn your life around. That message was meant for the nation, for the country, because slavery was so embedded in American society. The slave system was all of Wall Street. Wall Street was all about enslaving people. It was insuring slave ships. And it was the whole Southern plantation system, and it was embedded in the country. And by going around and saying that you can repent, that you can change your life, that you can become a new person by doing that, by encouraging people to stop drinking, that was a big part of it. They pushed temperance. By encouraging people to stop being involved in the slave trade and voluntarily leave any slavery-related enterprise. They were also saying that the whole country can turn around. That's what they were saying. They were saying this slavery stuff, this British free trade system that needs that cheap cotton for their textile mills, this is holding back development in the country. And if we don't break out of that open international system, that Adam Smith free trade system that spawned the slave plantation system, that doesn't believe in development, that is trying to recreate, the Roman Empire, with their plantation system, is trying to hold back technological progress to maintain some kind of rural feudal aristocracy. The slave owners of the South all thought they were knights in castles. They thought they were Sir Walter Scott. That if we don't break out of this horrendous way of being, the whole country is going to fall apart. And that's what they were saying in the Second Great Awakening. It's a beautiful message, because I can think of moments in my life where it was weird. I didn't see it coming, but something changed. Something changed. Before I moved to New York, I had the opportunity to move to New York a year earlier. But I was in an awful relationship. I almost got married. It was an awful relationship. I wish her well, wherever she is, but it was an awful relationship, and we were engaged, and it wasn't going to work. And that was a long time ago. But I was in Cleveland, and I was in this relationship that was holding me back, and then something happened. There was a night that changed my life, and it was so weird. I never thought it would get to that point. But I said, you know what? This relationship's over. Pretty soon, me and that girl parted ways. And then in a few months, I was in New York City. And my life completely changed. It was amazing. I can think of some other examples that I won't get into. But, there's times where my life has dramatically changed because something within me forced me to do it. And the thing is, I'm a very loyal person. You know, I tend to stay in relationships. I tend to stay in political groups. I tend to not change jobs. You know, I like to be secure. I guess I have a conservative side. You know, my wife and I have been married for 8 years. We're very happy here in New York. But I guess there's just part of me that doesn't like abrupt, dramatic changes. You know, there's part of me that just wants to stick with it. But then there comes a time in your life where you can't stick with it any longer. You can't stick with it any longer. Things have got to change, because if not, you're going to hell. You're going off a cliff. You got to change. And it's so interesting to me because, you know, I thank God, you know, I don't know if it's just the fact that I inherited, I'm always dry. And so when I drink, I get a headache. And so I've never had a problem with alcohol, and I've never used drugs in my life. And so I've never had that struggle. And all of you who are watching who have had a struggle with drugs or alcohol in your life, my heart goes out to you, because I'm so lucky that has not been something that has affected me. And it's pure luck, right? I mean, you know, with me, alcohol makes me ill. I just don't like it, you know? And for whatever reason, my life circumstances, I never, you know, got into drugs. And, you know, so I may have dodged a bullet. I see what other people go through, what they struggle with. You know, and I'm thankful that I haven't had to struggle that way. But I keep hearing the same story from people. And this is an interesting one. I've heard this story from many people who've joined CPI. And of course, I don't tell people this story because it's a private thing, right? If I were to tell you who this was, that would be a violation of their privacy. You don't do that. You got to protect people's privacy. But there are multiple people. I mean, lots of people that are part of this community now, that are part of the Center for Political Innovation, that knew of me beforehand. This is interesting. They knew about me. They were into socialism. They were into communism. They knew about me beforehand. They knew about me. They'd seen one of my books here. They'd seen a YouTube video here. But they didn't really pay any attention to me until they got sober, until they hit rock bottom, until they hit that moment where they wanted to stop using drugs. They wanted to stop using drugs. They wanted to stop drinking alcohol. They wanted to stop, you know, they wanted to get their life in order. And then suddenly they've told, and I've heard these exact same stories, these exact same words from so many people. Suddenly, I was the only socialist they could stand to listen to. They'd been listening to Thought Slime before. They'd been listening to Vosh before. They'd been listening to Trotskyites before and anarcho-Maoist rage-a-halt. But suddenly, they couldn't listen to them anymore, because all of those people are negative and pessimistic and hopeless and destructive and rage-filled. It's all turn it down, burn it down, tear it down. I want this country to fall apart. It's this. And if you're trying to get your life together, and you're trying to be an adult, and you're trying to maintain control, you can't think that way. You can't think that way. Right? I mean, I've never struggled with drug addiction. I've struggled with other issues in my life, and I know it for a fact. You can't be a leftist. You can't be a bread tuber. You can't be a Jacobin bot. You can't be a young Turksoid and get your life in order, because their whole message is there's no hope. There's no hope. Everything's falling apart, degrowth, tear it down, burn it down, you know, making fun of people, laughing at the failures of society, laughing about the lack of education in the country, laughing at people. You know, anyone who achieves something good, you got to tear them down. Oh, yeah, well, they suck. They're, you know, this sarcastic attitude. If you're trying to get your life together, you can't think that way anymore. And then they hear me, and I'm all about optimism. And I'm all about constructive socialism. I'm all about getting things together, people getting things together. I'm saying we have to be positive. We have to be patriotic. We have to love our country, love our community, and show that we love it so much that we want to rescue it from capitalism. And I want to build a community of people who care for each other and love each other and care about each other enough enough to build organizations, build blocks, combinations that can resist capitalist power and fight for the rights not of the individual but of the whole community, to say we deserve a better country than this. I'm an optimistic socialist. I'm a constructive socialist. My socialism is like Che Guevara, who said revolutionaries are motivated by great feelings of love. My socialism is a completely different brand than this, this junky, pessimistic, bread tube, self-destruction, hate socialism. My socialism is of a completely different brand. Completely different brand. I've got a different product here. And people say, Caleb, your socialism is the only socialism I can stand now. You're the only one who's not preaching hate on these streams. You're the only one who's not trying to tear things down. You're the only one who doesn't, when I listen to these other socialists, I want to go shoot up. When I listen to these other socialists, I want to go get drunk. When I listen to these other socialists, I want to kill myself. When I listen to these other socialists, I just don't want to get up in the morning. The world seems so hopeless and so unforgiving and unbelievable. I don't want to listen to them. When I listen to you and I hear you talk about a government of action, and I hear you talk about love, and I hear you tell those stories about how communism saved your life and how you learned to sell newspapers. I hear you tell the stories that from when you went to Venezuela and you went to Iran, that you're doing something different here, Caleb. There's something different in what you're doing. They're right. There's something different in what I'm doing here. You are damn right about that. We are doing something different on this stream than the synthetic left are doing. We are doing something completely different on this stream. You can be damn sure about that. We are doing something completely different. We are. We are. And the ruling class is pushing depression and hopelessness and suicide like crazy on us. And the ruling class is pushing drugs and pornography and all kinds of self-destructive things on us. And they're doing that. They're pushing all this poison. They're pushing all this poison onto us. And thank you, David Fox. Thank you. They're pushing all this poison onto us right now. And this poison is coming out of your phone. It's coming out of your cell phone, right? It's coming out of your cell phone, and it's coming out of your iPad and your laptop, and it's coming out of your TV screen. And if you walk outside, there's billboards. It's coming out of the billboards, and it's coming out of everywhere. It's coming out of your radio. Everywhere. They've got this voice that's saying, it's hopeless. There's no point in living. Screw it. Don't think about your future. Don't hold your life together. There's no hope. There's no point. I mean, there's just this evil flowing through all of our society. You talk about Satan, right? You talk about Satan, whether you think Satan's a being or just that evil energy that I described, right? That belief that there are too many people in the world, that belief that there's too many people in this world, that there's no point in life, that humans are a cancer on Mother Earth, that there is no future, that humans are naturally evil deep down, the anti-populism, it's just oozing through our society. And they've got so many new mechanisms for pumping it into us, just pumping this hate, this self-hatred, this anti-humanism, this hatred for humanity into all of us. And some people can't resist. I mean, the death rate is rising. People are dying. I mean, some people just can't resist it, right? And it's not that these people are bad. It's not that these people are weak. It's not these people deserve it. It's just that some people, they just get overwhelmed. I mean, they're trying to kill us right now, folks. They are trying openly to drive down the population, to reduce consumption. They're trying to kill us right now. I mean, they are definitely trying to kill us, and these white supremacists, they talk about great replacement. They want to make it about, they're trying to kill the whites. They've been trying to kill the blacks for way longer, right? Look at Hurricane Katrina, where they left all those black people on their rooftops to die. Look at the prison industrial complex. They've been trying to kill the black people way longer than they've been trying to kill the white people. So no, it's not a racial thing. We're not preaching great replacement here. We're preaching the breakdown of capitalism. We're preaching that degrowth is how they're trying to stabilize their system. That's what we're preaching here. This is what we're preaching. This is what we're preaching. Right? We're not preaching racism. We're not preaching conspiracy theories. We're preaching scientific socialism. We understand why this capitalist system is doomed to fail. We understand how their capitalist system is operating. We understand what's going on here. We have the science scientific socialism here. And it's because we understand. It's because we understand that we can resist and that we have a solution. But anyway, the point I was making was that so many people are just overwhelmed by all the pessimism, all the hate, and all the destructivism that comes. And some people, they just become overwhelmed by it. But there's a lot of people, for whatever reason, and I think it's natural. There's a lot of people who are caught up in all of this. They're caught up in all this evil, whether it's drugs or just depression. In my case, it was a lot of hopelessness, a lot of depression, a lot of anger. You know, people get caught up in a lot of hopelessness, a lot of anger, a lot of self-hate, a lot of, you know, people get caught up in this, and their rage and the destructiveness, and then a lot of people, for whatever reason, a lot of people, one day something clicks. And they don't know what it is. They don't know what it is. And it's not conscious. It's not in their brain. It's not like they made the conscious decision. Well, based on weighing the options, I have decided to become optimistic. I have decided to get my life in order. I have decided to take control of my life. It's not that. It's not a conscious decision. Something clicks. And they say, got to get out of this road. Got to turn my life around. Got to fight for my life. Got to fight for my ability to survive. Got to fight back. I am going to start asserting my humanity. I'm not going to die. That's what it is. It's their survival instinct kicks in. And suddenly the part of their brain that realizes they're dying wakes them up, and they say, I am going to fight for my life. I am not going to be killed. I'm not going to be killed by this depression that they're pumping into me. I'm not going to be killed by the drugs. I'm not going to be killed by the rage. I am going to fight. And their survival instinct kicks in, and they fight for themselves. They fight for themselves. And they wake up and they say, I am going to get my life in order. I am not going to be rolled over. I am going to fight. And it is their internal animalistic drive. You know, they say life seeks to preserve itself. That's what happens. And everything changes when that happens. I mean, sometimes they lose friends. They lose friends really quickly. They can't stay friends with people. Sometimes they might cut off. There might be a parent, a toxic parent, who is just so negative and such a negative influence in their life. And they cut them off. They estrange from them. Sometimes, you know, relationships end. I told you about that relationship I was in. And then one day it ended. It just ended, you know, and it wasn't a conscious thing, but and thank God that toxic relationship I was in back in Cleveland came to an end. You know, something just clicks and it ends and things change. Right? Well, the thing is, those are the people I think I can recruit to the Center for Political Innovation. I'm just being real with you, right? You know, I don't think that your average Vosh fan, you know, who spends their life, you know, smoking pot and playing video games and looking at porno, I don't think your average Vosh fan is going to join the Center for Political Innovation. You know, they're just not going to. And I don't think that your average, you know, thought slime guy, you know, fan is going to join us. I don't think that your average, you know, anime emojis, teenager, you know, who's, you know, got like a picture of themselves giving the middle finger on their Twitter, I don't think they're going to join us, you know? And I mean, you know, I don't think they would want to join us, and probably we wouldn't want them to join. Right. I mean, I don't want to put up barriers against anybody, but, you know, we probably wouldn't want your average, you know, internet doomer leftist kid to join us. Right. You know, I mean, we wouldn't bar them, but they wouldn't be happy in our group. They wouldn't be happy anywhere else either, but they wouldn't be attracted to our message. They would probably be like, this is stupid. You know, oh my God, they like believe in something. What nerds? Oh my God, they have passion. They like sing songs. They have flags. They like read books about Marxism. They're such nerds. You know, they would never join us, right? You know, they would never want to be part of what we're about. And that's fine. That's fine. We don't want them. But my feeling is that there's a lot of people that are like that. There's a lot of people that are like that. That are caught up in the negativity, caught up in the rage, caught up in the depression, caught up in the addictions. That one day they're going to wake up and that click is going to happen in their mind. That click that I'm talking about is going to happen. People talk about quantity and quality and all that. That click is going to happen. And we're still here. We're still here. We'll be here then. And if you want to get your life together and you want to be an optimist and you want to commit to building something instead of tearing things down, we're going to be here. We're going to be here. We're going to be right here. And you know what? We don't care what you said before. You know, that's the beautiful thing about the Center for Political. We don't care. If you talked shit about us on the internet, you tweeted hate at us, you made fun of us, we don't care. If you're willing to say that's not who I am anymore, if you're willing to say, I now want a community. I used to make fun of you guys for being a community. Now I want a community and I want it badly. If you're willing to say, you know what, you guys were right. We need an optimistic socialist message. If something changes in your mind and suddenly we look like the group for you, you're welcome. You're welcome. You know, you are welcome. We will bring you in with open arms. We're not in this to hold grudges. We're not in this to be a clique and bully people. You're welcome to join us. So if that day comes when you're ready to hear what we have to say, or if you know somebody who is ready to turn their life around and ready to embrace a socialism that's about building and not about tearing things down, point them our way. And don't feel like because they said something before, because they talked smack against us, because they took a side, we don't care. We don't care. Now, if you're going to put us in danger, that's one thing. You're going to bring drugs into our spaces, you're going to engage in illegal activities, that's something different, right? If you're going to, treat people in our group badly, if you're going to be bullying people or something like that, that's different. But if you were somebody who was talking smack against CPI, if you were somebody who was saying that CPI is no good, you were a Trotskyite or a Maoist or an ultra-leftist or whatever, we don't care. If you get to the point that you want to get serious about socialism, you get to the point that you really want to take up history's challenge, and you're ready to leave your past behind, you're ready to leave your old life behind, you're ready to join a movement that actually wants to win and is about love and not destruction, we'll take you. We'll take you. We'll take you. That's the kind of group we are. That's the kind of group we're building. We're not building a clique. We're not building a group of friends. We're not building a cancel culture club. We don't have a list of, I heard that some of these socialist groups have a list of toxic men or toxic people. We're not like that. We're not going to have somebody hold up the screenshots, right? There's always one of these jack-offs who's always going, I've got screenshots. We don't have screenshots on you, right? If you made bad tweets about us in the past and you're wrong now, no one in our group is going to go, I've got the screenshots. No one's going to got the screenshots. No one's going to hold up the screenshots. No one's going to do that. No one's going to be, I got the screenshots of what you said. You're a big fat phony. Not going to do it. It's not going to be like that. This is not a cancel culture club. This is not an ego trip. This is not about us being better than you. It's not about that. It's about the fact that working people have nothing until they come together. That's what it's about. It's about the fact that you can't survive in an evil society like this if you don't have people to have your back, people to care for you, people to give you support. And you also can't stay on the revolutionary road if you're living in this society with the propaganda being pumped at you. You need comrades. You need comrades. Comrades who can keep you in an atmosphere where you're studying Marxism, studying socialism, studying revolutionary ideology, keep you anti-imperialist, keep you connected to other anti-imperialists. Communism is not meant to be an internet thing. I mean, I'm on here on the internet saying it, but I'm just telling you, communism is not meant to be an internet thing. Communism is not meant to be something you do on the internet. That's not what it's meant to be. Communism is collective. What is the word? The root word of communism is community. The root word of socialism is society. It's not meant to be an isolated internet thing. It's meant to be a community. It's about brotherhood and sisterhood and comradeship. That's what it's meant to be. That is what it's meant to be, and that's what we're offering you here. If you don't want it, it ain't for you. But if you do want it, or if something changes in your life and you get to the point that you want it, our door is open. Our door is open. Our door is open. Our door is absolutely open, and we're going to be here. We're going to stay here. We're going to keep being here, you know. Give it a couple years. It might stop being trendy to be a socialist. It might stop being trendy to be a communist, right? You know, who knows what might happen. We're still going to be here. We ain't in this for it to be trendy. We ain't in this to be cool. We ain't in this because we're not in it for that reason. We're in this because we believe in this. And for us, yes, this is illiberal. Yes, this is a way of life. Yes, this is a viewpoint that puts us at odds with the prevailing institutions of society. You bet it is. Nope, it's not a hipster thing. Nope, it's not a Twitter, a social media phase. This is something different. So I guess I'll end my opening remarks for tonight, and then we'll do the roll call and the super chats. I'll end my opening remarks tonight by reciting a poem that I once heard. A poem that was once recited to me that I really like. It kind of captures the essence of what it means to be a constructive 21st century socialist versus a wrecker. And this is the poem that I heard. One of my favorite poems. On a busy street in a busy town, I saw them tearing a building down. With a ho-heave-ho and a lusty yell, the men swung a beam and a side wall fell. So I said to the foreman, are these men skilled, like those you might hire if you wanted to build? The foreman just smiled and said, no, indeed. Unskilled labor is all that I need, for I can easily wreck in a week or two that which took builders years to do. So I thought to myself as I walked away, which of these roles have I tried to play? Am I a builder who builds with care, measuring life with a compass and square? Am I living my life by a well-made plan and striving to do the best that I can? Or am I that type that scours the town, content with the labor of tearing things down? All right. So on that note, roll call, names and locations. We already got David from Seattle. Shout out to you, David from Seattle. David from Seattle is with us. Welcome, David. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. We got Cleveland Pirate Alex. Very good. We got Jenny Lynn. She's in Cincinnati. We got Mark in Utica. We got Steve and Ann in Georgia. Shout out to you all. There we go. We got Richmond, Virginia. We got Tyler. Shout out to you, Tyler. Very, very good. Shout out to you, Tyler. Tyler's in Missouri. We got Lily in NYC. You're back. Lily is back from Nicaragua, folks. Lily's back. Bendigo, Australia, David Fox. Tyler from Missouri. Wabacone. Mark from Washington. Enoch from Australia. Melbourne. We got Real Politics Houston. We got Charlotte, Char Darling from Nassau County. We love you, Charlotte. Kendall in San Diego. Chris in Salt Lake City. You're a regular. Have I met you in person, Chris? You're a regular. You're on here all the time. Tim from Chicago. We got Johnny in Washington. Shout out to you, Johnny. Good luck with everything. We got Hugo from the Netherlands. We got Tyler Dignot from Quebec. We got Kieran from San Diego. Always here. You don't miss a stream, do you? We got Zapato from Michigan. We got Josh Knorr from St. Louis, Missouri. We got Cedarhurst from New York. John Williamson, Cedarhurst, New York. Very good. We got Edinburgh. Heidi Edelweiss from Edinburgh, Scotland. We got Dario from Brooklyn. Baltimore, Maryland. We got Beirut, Lebanon. Hussein Abbas. Kendall in San Diego. John Whitty from Houston. Very, very good. Very, very good. Naples, Florida. Harold Sullivan, you're always here. I hope I get to meet you soon. You know, you are always here. You are always here. Someone from Myanmar. That's pretty cool. Myanmar. Damn. We got someone from Myanmar. Silicon Valley. Jenny Boris from Silicon Valley. Mo and Danielle from Pomona, California. Micah from Las Vegas. Daniel from Uruguay. Daniel from Uruguay is with us. Texas. Light of the Moon, Texas. A Better America from Michigan is with us. St. David's, Bermuda. Aga Einstein is with us. Very, very good. Very, very good. Germany, Klaus Kinski is from Germany. Very, very good. Glad to have you, Klaus. Bermuda, Z Marzi from Bermuda. Very, very good. Very, very good. Very, very good. Dennis from Ohio. Andrew from Colorado. Bob from New York, Mexico City. Jared from Virginia is with us. Very, very, very good. Jared from Virginia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to have you all here. It's really awesome. Be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notifications bell. Awesome intro. Well, I'm doing the best I can. We got Jared from Virginia, Mexico City, Javier. We got Chad from Chad. All right. I hope Chad is actually from Chad. That would be really cool. Yada Yisrael in Chicago. Well, I see you at the conference, Yada. There you go. There we go. We got Leanne from Cincinnati. Very, very good. We got Gavin. Shout out to you, Gavin. Oh, Gavin's a good friend of ours. He's a great member of our community. We love you, Gavin. Good to talk to you. Paul from Southwest Ohio. We got Ash in Chicago. Shout out to you, Ash. Very, very good. Very, very, very good. Very, very good. We got Bradley Wasser in St. Louis. Very, very good. Very, very good. All right. Based Chad from Chad. There you go. Based Chad from Chad. Based Chad from Chad. All right. Yeah. Very, very good. All right. All right. Absolutely. Praise for Gavin. We love Gavin. Great to have him. Tim from La Junta. Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati once again. All right. So great to have everyone here. So great to have everybody here. So now I have to answer these super chat questions. So there we go. First question is, what do I think of Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger? I grew up listening to Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger. My parents are both big folk music fans. I didn't even know who Pete Seeger was. I just knew his voice because my parents were always listening to audio cassettes of Pete Seeger. And when I was a kid, Pete Seeger's voice was in the house all the time. Woody Guthrie also. My mom and dad had cassette tapes of Woody Guthrie. My parents are not communists by any means. Quite conservative. Compared to the area I was in, they were pretty liberal, but they're pretty conservative in comparison. But yeah, they both liked folk music. It's kind of a generational thing, A lot of boomers really like folk music, so I grew up listening to folk music. Yeah, I mean, Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, they were part of the Almanac Singers, which was kind of a CPUSA aligned folk group in the late 1930s. Um, it was part of the Popular Front strategy. Actually, that's why the communists got into folk music, was because of the fact that that there was a feeling that they needed to go into American traditions, American culture, American history, and try to find revolutionary messages. That was part of the Popular Front. So they're trying to force communism onto the American people, find things in American culture that are in line with communism, is the idea, and build it up, right? And so the Communist Party sponsored a lot of folk music concerts, a lot of festivals, arts festivals, where people would do wood carving and things like that. It was try to build up aspects of the American culture. And one of the things that Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger did is that, they were both white, and a lot of the music they sang was like white hillbilly music, right? It was, bluegrass or just white folk music with a guitar, with a banjo. But one of the things that they did is they did make a point of playing African American songs, and they played them in a not like Elvis, who was like doing black music and getting rich off of it as a white guy, but rather in their own kind of like as a way to like popularize it. Like there was a song called "Good Night Irene," right, and that was written by a black performer, Ledbetter, right? They call him Lead Belly, or Ledbetter was his name. They performed it for white audiences, and it was a way of kind of, they would mix intercultural stuff in with their American folk music, which is pretty neat, actually. You can listen to some of the stuff that they composed for like the Henry Wallace campaign in 1948. 1948, there was the PAC. What is it? The Political Action Committee of the CIO that was for Henry Wallace, and so. They have a whole album that's like dedicated to the PAC. It's all songs supporting Henry Wallace and opposing Taft-Hartley, etc. So there you go. All righty, next question. Was there a larger conspiracy to kill Lincoln? I don't think there was. It's possible. I don't think there was. John Wilkes Booth was an actor at Ford's Theater, and he was an actor there, so he had access to the theater, and he was a Southern pro-slavery guy. He was from like one of these wealthy Southern families. He wanted to be an actor. He was like, he was very proud of his Southern aristocratic heritage. He was a big supporter of slavery. And he worked at Ford's Theater. He was an actor, and the president was there, and he took the opportunity to shoot the president. John Wilkes Booth, I think he acted alone. It's possible that he didn't. It's possible he had help escaping. I know a lot of people have reflected on that, right? That he may have, the fact that he got so far when he escaped may have been, a result of the fact that he was helped by somebody. There's the doctor. A doctor who helped him. It was Dr. Mudd, right? And he helped him, he fixed his leg or something. And so he went to prison as an accomplice for the assassination of Lincoln. And they called him Dr. Mudd, and they said, his name is Mudd. That was an expression. Mudd was considered not a good guy because he helped John Wilkes Booth. I'll never get over Ann Coulter. In one of her books, she's making the case that every presidential assassin, she claims, was a liberal. And so when she refers to John Wilkes Booth, she said John Wilkes Booth was an anti-war activist and a famous actor, basically the Sean Penn of the 1860s. I mean, I'm sorry, but John Wilkes Booth was not a leftist in any conceivable way. He was a right-winger. He was an advocate of slavery. That's ridiculous, right? And it just shows you how dishonest some of these right-wing commentators can be. But there you go, right? I wouldn't call him an anti-war activist. He was on the side of the South. So there you go. And the South started the war by taking up arms against the Union. So there you go. Next question. Is this quote relevant today? The banner of bourgeois liberty is thrown overboard. Communists must take up the banner of defending these liberties. Stalin. Yes, it's very relevant. And that's Stalin talking about the Popular Front. right? That as capitalism enters a crisis, it moves toward fascism, right? We talked about Bonapartism and fascism. And so part of fascism is abolishing those liberties. So communists defend those liberties, right? As part of building a popular front. And in Stalin's day, the Popular Front meant supporting Roosevelt against the fascists. It meant supporting organized labor. It meant, it meant building kind of a broad movement for democratic rights, for organized labor, and opposing the fascist threat, which was coming mainly from factory owners and the military, right? And so, you had a popular front that included capitalists and others who didn't want fascism, and that was about defending those civil liberties that capitalism would have to abolish amid a crisis. So yes, there's definitely something to that quote by Stalin. And that I think you really ought to go read Georgy Dimitrov's case for the United Front against fascism, because it really gets into the fact that capitalism, as it breaks down, leads toward a fascist state. So it becomes the responsibility of communists to build up the forces of democracy. Right? We're really defending democracy, and that's why we don't call for violent revolution, right? Because we're defending democracy. Right? Is that the capitalists are the ones that will abolish democracy. The capitalists are the ones that will become violent and oppress our movement. But we're going to defend our movement, and the process of our revolution will be defending democracy and defending our movement. So I'm actually going to post in the chat, because I think it's just so important. There's two quotes, two pieces: United Front Against Fascism, right? Dimitrov, by Dimitrov. I'm going to post that. It's his speech to it was August 2nd, 1935. This was his speech to the 7th World Congress of the Communist International, right? And I'm posting it here, and it's about the Popular Front and where the Popular Front came from. And it's not short, it's very long, and it is about the 1930s, so it's not our time. We're living in a different time, but that was Georgy Dimitrov and his explanation of why why fascism had arisen in the 1930s and how communists should fight it. And I'm going to post another piece that I think is very important. And this is a much more obscure pamphlet, but it's really important, right? It's very, very important, I think. I learned a lot from this pamphlet, because I am very heavily influenced, I admit, by psychoanalysis, okay? And this is a pamphlet published by the Communist Party of Britain, right? And it's called Freud and Marx, A Dialectical Study, right? Freud and Marx, A Dialectical Study. And I'm going to post it on here, because it actually, it's explaining Sigmund Freud's theories and showing where they overlap with Karl Marx's theories, right? And it's a very clear explanation of Karl Marx's theories and teachings. But it's more than that, because it ends by talking about why you should be a patriotic socialist. And it quotes Dimitrov, and it talks about how the communist parties of the 1930s, they were so big because they tapped into people's subconscious desires. People want stability, right? People naturally want stability. So what was the slogan of the Communist Party in the 1940 election? The way out, right? Capitalism was making people's lives unstable. So the Communist Party said, we need to be the voice of stability. Well, this is very psychological, right? So they wrote The Way Out. And I'm posting the link. And this Freud and Marx, The Dialectical Relationship, it's a very good pamphlet. It was published by the Communist Party of Britain in 1936. And it talks towards the end about, and why did they push socialist patriotism so much, right? Why did they push it so hard? Because patriotic imagery and love for the country and all that was really embedded in the subconscious of the people. And you're not going to win a war against ideas that are embedded in people's conscious. You have to find out, what it is that people, ideas, things that people are really attached to. And you have to make communism compatible with those things. You have to make communism the true expression of those things, right? It's a very, very good pamphlet. I would recommend that, right? That if we're going to win, we need to be thinking about what motivates people. What are people's true desires? Not what they say they want. Not what they say they want, right? What people say they want is often what they don't really want, right? They know, but what people really want, what motivates people, right? That needs to be something that we study if we're going to win. And so that great pamphlet from Red Star Publishers, 1937. It's very, very good, and it gets into great detail about Sigmund Freud's analysis and where it could overlap with Marxism and how that plays into the Popular Front, which is a really fascinating piece. So I'm posting that as well. So there you go. If you want to talk about defensive democracy, the Popular Front, read Georgy Dimitrov and his piece about the United Front Against Fascism, and read the Freud and Marx pamphlet. So there you go. All right. Are you familiar with the situation in Lebanon? What is the solution? Should Hezbollah disarm? Well, if Hezbollah disarmed, Israel would be completely out of control. Israel is vicious to the Palestinians. Israel is vicious to its neighbors and is threatening Iran. Israel is involved in destabilizing Syria. And if Hezbollah were to disarm, first of all, Hezbollah is one of the key forces in Syria fighting against the terrorists and defending the Syrian Arab Republic. So if Hezbollah in Syria disarmed, that would be a huge loss to the Syrian people. And in Syria, they're trying to defend their government from the Wahhabis, from the forces that want to set up a new Saudi autocracy, right? And the Syrian government has the Communist Party in the government, two of them, the Syrian Communist Party and the Syrian Communist Party Bakdash, and Hezbollah has sent their soldiers to Syria, to defend the Syrian government. And so, if Hezbollah were to just disarm, that would lead to Syria falling, right? It would also lead to Israel feeling like they have a license to go throughout the region and attack, right? In Iraq, it's not Hezbollah, but it's like, Hezbollah-aligned militias that are modeled on Hezbollah are key in defending Shia Muslims in Iraq, right? I know Hezbollah is a big source of inspiration to the Houthis and the revolutionary forces in Yemen. So Hezbollah disarming would not be good for the Middle East, I don't think. It would lead to the imperialists having an upper hand because Hezbollah in Lebanon is just a really big barrier of resistance to the U.S. imperialists, aligned with the Syrian Ba'athist Arab Socialist government, aligned with the people of Yemen, aligned with the Islamic Republic of Iran, aligned with the Palestinians and their resistance. I obviously want peace. I don't support terrorism or violence. I want peace, but the Syrian people are defending themselves. They need help defending themselves. The Palestinians are defending themselves. They need help. So there you go. I don't think it would be a good thing for that to happen. There we go. Pros and cons of Titoism. Well, Tito's foreign policy was a nightmare. Tito's foreign policy, was he aligned with the United States against the Soviet Union. He aligned with the United States in the Korean War. That wasn't good. Tito's economics, there's something that can be learned from that. I think that Tito's, worker self-management model was probably a big influence on Deng Xiaoping and his market reforms. It's where every factory is autonomous. Every factory is basically a collective farm in the Titoist model, right? In socialism, you have state-run industries, which at the state-run industries, everyone gets a wage, right? And then in Soviet-style model, the state-run factories they're run by the government. Everyone gets a wage. You might get a reward if you produce more, right? Stakhanovism, but state-run. Whereas the farms get paid for how much they produce, right? The farms, if it's a wheat farm, they grow so much wheat, and then they sell it to the government, and the government gives them, per bushel of wheat, they get so much. Or if it's a strawberry farm, for every pound of strawberries, they get, the government pays them so much, right? The farms are like cooperatives that sell their goods to the state, and the factories are just wings of the government. Well, in Tito's Yugoslavia, they made the factories like the farms. They were like, they sold their goods to the state. The government, it was a tire factory. The government bought the tires from the factory and paid the factory so much per tire, right? And that was the way Tito did it. And it had some strengths. It probably motivated workers to produce more. It gave more autonomy. So, I don't know, it may have had some strengths, but ultimately, it did weaken central planning in Yugoslavia to some degree or other. And that's important. And it led to, strengthening some of the divisions between the nationalities in Yugoslavia, because some of the regions were producing more. But even though every factory was autonomous and sold its good to the state, they all had to pay into the healthcare system. They all had to pay into social services, and you could see which regions were more productive than others. And the Croatians, if they didn't like the Macedonians or they didn't like the Serbs, they could be like, well, we in Serbia, we produce way more over here, and yet we have to pay for those freeloaders over there. And it led to kind of competition between the regions, and that may have added to some of the nationalities in Yugoslavia that have differences. So, but I am a very much, socialism in Yugoslavia provided a good living standard. It raised productive forces. And when it was destroyed, Michael Parenti has a great book, To Kill a Nation, about it. And he talks about the achievements in terms of public health and education. So there's plenty we can learn from Tito's model of socialism in Yugoslavia. It's different than the Soviet model, but it's not the Deng Xiaoping system. There wasn't much of a market. There was some market forces, but not a lot. And I would say, Yugoslavia was a socialist country. Does Bonapartism exist under socialism? I don't think it does. My understanding of Bonapartism is that it does not. That it is based on the breakdown of capitalism, one faction of the capitalist class seizing power. However, I know that there are some socialist analysts who think it did. Mao, for example, the reason that he opposed the Shanghai Commune, the January storm during the Cultural Revolution, Shanghai was seized by the Red Guards. Mao opposed it, and he said the Commune would give birth to Bonapartism. And I know there was talk among Stalin talked about how Trotsky was kind of a socialist Bonapartist. He wanted to use the military to control the rest of the party. And so I've heard there are socialist analysts who talk about Bonapartism within a socialist state. My understanding of Bonapartism is that it is part of the breakdown of capitalism. But I know that there is a concept of Bonapartism that Stalin and Mao both talked about when trying to stabilize socialism in their respective countries. So that, yeah, I think there is a concept of Bonapartism within socialism. I would say also that socialist revolutions emerge from Bonapartist struggles within the ruling class. That it's maneuvering and entering alliances with the different capitalists, right, in order to build up your forces, right? That Bonapartist struggles are key in the working class being on the road to taking power. So I think that's an important point. What were the causes of World War I, specifically referring to Eastern Europe? Well, the cause of World War I was an economic crisis and the fact that the imperialists were fighting over the colonized world, and that Eastern Europe was very much the playground of the capitalists of the Western capitalist countries, France and Germany, and especially Germany, but Britain, and they very much felt like Eastern Europe was their property, and they were battling with each other over who got to dominate the markets of the Eastern European countries, right? You have to remember oil was very important. During the Russian Civil War that followed the Russian Revolution, what was one of the main things that the British military did? They went to Azerbaijan and seized the oil fields, right? That the British oil corporations, the Rothschilds, and other British Noble Oil, which is an oil company, they went and they seized the oil fields of Azerbaijan, right? That it was access to oil that very much won the war, for the Americans and the British and the French, right? And that Eastern Europe has a lot of resources, and that the Russian Empire was a source of oil. It provided oil to the Allies during World War I, and that oil is very, very important. Obviously, people talk about the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand, but that was one incident. But there were many other factors. That there was a rivalry. That the imperialist powers of Western Europe were, they were battling with each other over domination of Eastern Europe, its markets, its people, etc. Right, and they were battling over Africa and Asia. It's interesting that the war, most of the fighting, almost all of the fighting of World War I happened in Europe, because they were mainly fighting over Africa and Asia, and that's what they were fighting over. So it's kind of interesting. So there you go. One of the things the Bolsheviks did during the Russian Revolution was they pulled a WikiLeaks. There was a secret treaty called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The Russians were aligned with the United States, aligned with the British and the Americans. And so among the Allied powers in World War I, a secret treaty was drawn up called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a secret treaty among the Allies. And that's where all the modern states of the Middle East, Syria, Jordan, Iraq, the borders, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Oman. The borders were drawn up by the imperialists in this secret treaty called the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and the Bolsheviks published it. They pulled a WikiLeaks when they took power and they got access to all the Tsar's documents. They published this secret treaty called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So there you go. All right, folks. I am going to end it here. I will say, please come to this amazing conference coming up in Chicago. If you can help us have this conference, that would be great. We could really appreciate, a donation. If you can send us a donation to help have the conference, you can shoot us CPI events on Cash App. That would be a great way to help us out. That's a great way to fund this event. It's going to be a great conference. We're an amazing community here. We do special things. We have a special attachment to each other. What we do on these streams is really important, but it all amounts to nothing if we don't build an in real life community. So I need you and you need us, and we're going to march ahead. We're going to march forward. So, all right, everybody. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. Out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. Out of the movement to the masses. Dare to struggle. Dare to win. Good night, everybody.